Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another December, almost Christmas issue of In the Umpire's Clubhouse. Today, we've got a former major leaguer who's probably smarter than all three of us put together. Um, he went to Penn. He played the outfield for the Cubs, the Rangers, the Phillies, and he's working for ESPN. He writes poetry. He teaches at UConn. Welcome to the show, Doug Glanville.
Well, it's great to be on. I jumped at the opportunity. You reached out. I'm like, absolutely. So
We
Well,
I'm
that's
very
not
excited.
everybody does that actually. So we're
So
Okay,
no, it's
okay.
great
The
to be on.
elephant in the room. I thought about this. I told this to my wife. I said the first question I have to ask Doug is, did either of these two guys eject you? Do you get run by either one of these guys?
Well, I never got ejected. That's the
Oh,
there you
well,
good
there
go.
news.
you
So,
go.
so I never got ejected. So,
This is the
uh,
first time that we've ever heard his voice, actually, to tell you the absolute truth. I was thinking about this before. One of our pet things is, did you inject this player? Did you have arguments with this player? I never knew Doug's voice until he just came on the podcast. To be very honest with
Well, I had him
yeah,
once. He
Very
called
honest.
time, and so I so I said
yeah,
okay. Um, but
yes.
part of it too is Doug was with the Cubs in the '90s when Jimmy and I were American League umpires. So we weren't we didn't
Yeah.
we couldn't hear him because we weren't in the we
Exactly.
weren't.
Exactly.
So, Doug,
But
what was
yeah,
it? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Dale.
well, I was going to say we're really happy to have you here, and you had quite a career. I mean, and I think you wrote about it at one point. Quite a prospect going into professional baseball, and then coming up with the Cubs and everything, and then injuries and things happen. But you had some great years. I mean, I was just looking 293 consecutive games with no errors. I mean. I can go maybe half an inning. I don't know. It's without that. Um, your year in '99 with the Phillies. I mean, hit 325, 11 home runs, 73 RBIs, 34 stolen bases. I mean, you could, a lot of assists out in the outfield. You could do it all. So, kudos to you for a heck of a career on the diamond. But you've also made a name for yourself and really have open eyes with the articles and blogs and discussions that you've had about baseball and other things, after your career. So, what was it like coming up, being a big prospect? Was there a lot of pressure on you? Were you able to compartmentalize that to your job on the field? I know as umpires, a lot of times there's all this noise, and you just try to focus in and do what you got to do. That's what most professionals are able to do. And tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, well, I love baseball, and part of the reason I was passionate about baseball is I have an older brother, Ken, and so he was about 7 to 8 years older, and he loved the game. Now, my dad was from Trinidad and Tobago, so he was more into cricket when he came to the United States when he was 31, and my mom was a teacher. So being that we were about 8 years apart, he kind of got into some of the sports early, and then I came along and I was kind of his project. So I really looked up, and I do look up to my brother, and we. He kind of orchestrated this, right? He said, okay, here's the plan. We're going to play wiffle ball and stickball and all these things, Stratomatic baseball,
Yeah.
Stratomatic. So it was laid out, pretty well. And I took to it, loved working out with him, loved playing. And I just started to get on this hot streak where I started realizing like, oh, I'm doing really well at all these levels, even levels that are people were much older than I was. And so when I finally that yielded being a first round draft pick, that was a whole different kind of pressure because you're drafted first, and outside of just the organization expecting you to do well, it's like the internal competition of all the guys in the minor leagues and you're
Yep.
drafted with or coming along or been there for 3 years when you get there, and there's a lot of like tension sometimes about like, oh, this is the first round pick, he's not that good, or whatever it is. So that was a different kind of peer pressure to figure out like how to fit in to this whole professional landscape after doing it in college and summer ball. And I think it helped me, learn how to, sort of toughen up about, okay, well, I gotta prove myself on the field. And it was great that I was, did well at Penn and all these things, but now it's a whole new season. And the spirit of that idea of having new seasons is sort of what helped me think of a lot of different things, right? Whether it's once I changed teams or got traded or released or went to winter ball or came back and decided to, go into media, all these things I started to see through that experience as like a new season, right? And the next chapter, in some ways you're starting over, in some ways you're trying to carry with you the things that you learned and hope that they translate. And so that really informed a lot of where I went next, what I was able to do in the game. And a lot of it was just pure joy. I remember getting scouted my junior year, and I had a great summer the summer before at Cape Cod. And how it is, every player has their criticism. And back then it was much more hands-on. They were calling you, you're trying to make sure, all these things. And I remember the criticism for me was that I was, more interested in academics in college than I was baseball. And even Peter Gammons, I love Peter Gammons, but he wrote about me in the Boston Globe, like saying, some think he's more interested in, whatever school than he is baseball. So that was my question about whether I would commit to baseball, right? I was kind of like, and I eventually had to come up with an argument because I got this question all the time. And the argument I made was, I said, well, look, all right, who are you comparing me to, right? You're the big baseball factory programs, right? The Arizona States, the Florida, they're excellent at the sports. And I said, you're criticizing me, but guess what? Like, I go to the field and there's 3 people at the game. Okay. It's freezing cold. We have to pull the tarp on the field ourselves. We have to do, all the schoolwork on top of us. We have no tutors. We have, it's like, I played because I loved it. Like there was no incentive. There was nobody at the game. I wasn't on scholarship. I was just there because I just love baseball. That was it. We weren't like lifted up on campus like, oh, look at these great dudes who play baseball. In fact, they were just like, why are you even here? Is that the only reason you got in here? I mean, it was, it was a lot of attitude. So I think that actually built a new kind of strength to the game that I used eventually on these scouts that would question my commitment. I was like, look, I'm committed with no incentives at all except to play the game. That's it. And so I think that started to sink in. And I think that commitment I was able to take with me wherever I went next.
That brings me to a question about playing in the Ivy League, as opposed, you mentioned Arizona State, UCLA, Florida State, those schools, and they play all year long. How different is it playing? I don't want to say Penn's a small school, but it's lower division than whatever. What do they call it, Dale? What do they call the divisions now?
Well, it's still D1, but it was like,
Yeah.
it was the Ivy had it. We were in the EIBL, so it was the Ivies and Army and Navy. So there's no doubt we were not like Arizona State or Florida. Now we were good. One of my years we did well. We got in the top 25 ranking. We beat Santa Barbara. We beat Illinois one year. But there's no doubt there's a difference between that and playing in the ACC.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Isn't it Division A1A?
I think, I remember the one like AA thing, but we were still D1. I think football gets that. I think football gets that differential.
Right,
They would never
exactly,
put Penn
exactly.
against Miami.
Yeah,
But I think
football,
baseball, we were still one.
right. I believe basketball and football are considered, in the quote unquote D1. But the beauty of baseball is, in my humble opinion, I went to Bowling Green State University in Ohio. People don't even know where that is. So, and I was lucky enough to play there for 4 years. But I understand what you're saying a little bit about that, because it's the minor leagues. It's you fend for yourself, and actually you're doing it because maybe you got a little bit of assistance, to go to school and stuff like that. But it was about the baseball is what it was, and that's the beauty of it. And you're exactly right. And the pressure sometimes of just showing up and playing the game was kind of hard. I think you're accentuating that very well, as a matter of fact, because people really don't realize that.
Yeah, I mean, and I was an engineer. I was a systems engineer, and fortunately,
Okay.
I had a phenomenal high school, so I was able to bring some credits with me to take one less course in the spring. Because normally with engineering, you had 5 classes a semester, all the way through 840 total, and I was able to take 4 in the spring because of my high school and taking the AP stuff. So that helped a lot. but it was it only got harder, right? My junior year. And I had a big controversy one year, the draft year, because I missed the game because I was studying for a final the next day. And it was like, some systems engineering class that I felt like I needed to do more. And I told my coaches, and it turned out the memo didn't get to all the scouts. So a lot of scouts came that game. And that just added to the negativity, right? Of like, oh, he's more, he's more worried about this than that. And I was just like, I had a final, so there was, that was it. And look, for me, it was kind of caught in between at times, because even at Penn, there was a lot of criticism about, well, that's the only reason you got into the school and that kind of thing. And, you had to wear that banner too. And I remember my professor, who I love to this day, like just about to turn 90, actually, I had a double header. We had games in our division on double header weekend, Saturday and Sunday. So you go to Brown and Dartmouth or whatever. So we were going to Brown and Dartmouth, and it was supposed to rain. And I remember saying, look, I might not be able to be back on Monday because we have to make up the rain out, and we have a test. So can I take it early? I was trying to work it out like 5 or 6 days in advance. So I'm talking to him before class, and he absolutely berates me in front of the whole class. You got to get your priorities straight. What are you talking about, going to some game out there? And I'm like, I'm representing the university. Like, what is the problem? So I think a lot of those things kind of tested me to be like where I stood and where I, how much love I had and passion for it. And I think that is sort of the understated part of like going to these underdog schools, right? And playing ball is like, you kind of think, oh yeah, these guys, the Ivy Leaguers, whatever. But you kind of had a chip on your shoulder about trying to prove yourself and also represent something that's not represented much in the sport. And I think that really helped me in a lot of other areas outside of the field as well.
See, I had the controversy also, not in the same regard, because I just didn't go to my finals. So
Jimmy was a good student.
yeah.
Well,
I was on that team bus in a heartbeat.
Doug, don't worry about Peter Gammons, right? Anything. He told me, he wrote once that when El Duque was pitching against the Red Sox in the LCS in '99, that I was more confused than the Red Sox batters. So it was always good to hear from Peter.
We need to get Gammo on here then and let you guys go at it.
Yeah, let Peter get on. Yes,
he had a great line once too. He said he was blasting Rocky Road. He goes, Rocky Road is much better as an ice cream than an umpire.
That's a good one.
Oh my!
But Rocky can throw it back though.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Rocky can throw it back. So
one of the funniest guys I ever worked with.
Ever.
Absolutely.
So your playing career was outstanding. And you're in your second career, which is after you retire, it must have been a little tough while you were playing to maybe figure out what the next life was going to be. And Dale and I have similar thoughts on the afterlife or the second life. Ours comes a little bit later in life, as you can see how well I've worn it. So, but in the umpire world, we've always talked to young guys about prepare yourself, because eventually you're going to have to transition to the next side. What is it like on the player side? Because your playing days are, I'm not saying limited, but they're much shorter than like an umpire life. Our umpire lives were over 30 years. Player's life, unless you get into coaching and you stay in their organizations and everything like that, is relatively smaller. What were your struggles on crossing over that line after you retired?
Well, it was a challenge. And even though like I felt good about, the degree I had, I was so far removed from engineering at that point,
right,
that it wasn't like I was going to walk right into IBM tomorrow. I had a lot to catch up on. So it was a little bit of a search. Fortunately, I played long enough. I had some bandwidth and resources to kind of take a little time to figure it out. It wasn't like, I was able to play 9 years in the big leagues and invested in all these different things. So I think I took some time. Now, one of the things is getting involved in different projects. A lot of times it happens as a player, right? People come to you, hey, can you buy into this restaurant? People throw all kind of business ideas,
right,
schemes at you. And you start going, well, what do I want to do? And you realize that there's nothing quite like baseball, right? There's nothing that's going to match the adrenaline, the excitement, being on stage, the competition, the camaraderie. There really is nothing like it. And you don't want to get into this mindset of like, well, there's nothing going to ever be as good as this. So I guess I'm just sort of, resolving myself to kind of a life that's not what it used to be. And I started to find ways to flip that on its head. I got married pretty quickly after someone I'd met during the last year of my career. So I started a whole new life, and she was an attorney doing, her thing. So there was a lot that gave me a different direction and focus. I got involved in different things in real estate, and I was searching. But the thing is, I didn't really have a clear plan, and we ended up leaving Philadelphia where I was involved, and going to Chicago, and I got a kind of fresh start in that way. And I think the thing that eventually drew me in was I read about all the commentary around the steroid when the Mitchell report broke in baseball. That was kind of my moment, because I always loved to write about the intersection of sport and society, even though there's a lot of stick to sports and all that. I just love that space, because I thought it gave a chance to give baseball even a bigger stage, because it could be like a force for good, a force for bringing people together. And I thought that was like an underserved part of the game, right? Because what I loved about playing too was like, wow, I get to meet people from all over the world, and we come into this one locker room. We got to figure it out. We got to be a team. And that's how I grew up in New Jersey, in Teaneck, just a diverse group of people trying to come together around something. So that became something I wanted to celebrate in my post career. So when I wrote about the Mitchell report, my criticism of like how it was covered, it was a lot of naming and name calling, right? It was like, let's find out who, and let's call them all these names. And I was like, well, let's look at the kind of nuance in the middle of this. Like, why do players take steroids? Let's look at it. It's not that simple as like pure greed. There's like insecurity, there's fear, there's the guys catching up behind you, there's I'm taking care of my family in the DR. I mean, I just kind of wanted to throw other parts of it, not giving people hall passes, but understanding it more. And that really launched my media career, just writing about those kind of topics. And then the New York Times called, and I started doing more, and I just kind of kept going. And then I really fell in love with the commentary around baseball that celebrated it or elevated it in ways that brought people together, made you think about issues off the field that actually relate to it. And then I felt like I had something like almost like a calling, like to keep going. Like I said, okay, this is what I want to do. And so it kind of came on me, and I was just ready for it. And been going ever since.
Well, Doug, you're a well-spoken man, obviously being from Penn. How do the players relate to you with the steroid article and everything else? How do they react to that? Are they like, why are you doing this? Or are they like open to you doing this?
Well, the interesting thing about that is, when I've been writing all before some of the topics, that the first article did well, because it wasn't like you're a bad dude. It was much more about like, let's say kind of consider all these other angles. I think throughout my media career, what's been rewarding for me is a lot of players feeling like, that I'm fair, and that I try to, use to sort of teach or even learn in an exchange about players, as opposed to like criticize them and get points on blasting them on social media. I think it's more important for me to like educate an audience, and I've taught for many years at UConn, and one thing I learned about education is it's reciprocal. Like, I may be saying like I know these things, but then I find all the feedback like, oh, I learned that from this fan. I learned that from. So I think the reciprocal part of it. And then when I finally, a couple of years ago, really dove in to a steroid commentary about the Hall of Fame, it was a little risky, because you didn't want to be the guy standing on the mountain like calling people out. But at the same time, I had kind of held a lot of stuff that a lot of players held that chose not to take steroids inside, and just watching people sort of excuse it, or and I was like, okay, come on, let's talk about this. Right. So I did. I wrote it, and I heard from a lot of players quietly. They didn't like jump on social media, but they kind of emailed me, send me messages on LinkedIn saying thank you for saying that, because you can normalize it after a while. Like, well, you look back, oh, I forgot about it. That was 20 years ago. It was no big deal. And then you realize like, wait a minute, like, I don't want people to forget that this was an advantage and this was not fair. And we could get into the moral discussions and all these things, but I just wanted to outline it in a way that shared like what it was like to a player that chose not to, and the fact that you don't want to lose that spirit, you want to lose that. And so I think it's overall been received well, and yet I feel like I still can call on tough topics and challenge them.
Well, that's a good point too, because during that whole discussion of steroids, it was the guys that used them and this and that. There's a ton of guys that didn't, and that were just trying to play the game, the right way and without the advantages, and they basically didn't talk about, that didn't bring out the clicks and the headline stuff. So let's talk about and so. You who lived it, you were on the field, you were in the locker rooms, you saw, you were right there, and someone that did not participate in that, and so it was very respected. But I'm sure you got a lot of, even though it was more discreet, heard from a lot of players who say, "Hey, thanks, man," because that's an important part of, I think, people forget because all you see is the blaring headlines of the the names and that kind of stuff. I was going to ask you, you love to write, don't you? And writing is a skill. It's something that, I mean, and trust me, I with the help of another, Rob Nair, I wrote a book, but I really liked the process. I really enjoyed writing, and I got better at it as I went along, and I kind of learned stuff, and I'm not saying. I don't know if I'm not saying it came natural to me. I'm just saying I enjoyed the process, and I enjoyed writing, and even when I'm just writing other things, not a book, obviously, but I just enjoy it and how to put things together and thoughts and describe things. One of the challenges I had in writing the book is, you have all these baseball stories, arguments, and plays and situations that I would have, which I have been telling as a story for years, but now you got to put it on a piece of paper and write it and try and hope that the reader gets the same. When I'm talking, I can pause, I can change my voice, I can do a lot of things to help that story. How do you do that on paper? And so that was a challenge, and that was kind of fun. But I was going to ask you, does it come natural to you? Is it something that you really, you obviously must enjoy because you do a lot of it?
No, I love it. I go back, I give a lot of credit to my high school English teachers, even junior high, coming up. I had some great teachers. I did. And so I think that gave me the structure, the really, and when I got to college, I was an engineer, but I took a couple of kind of off the beaten path classes, like intro to folklore and,
Wow.
and I did really well in the papers. And I was like, wow, this writing carried over from high school, So I realized that I knew the structure well, and I loved it. And I think the dad, I mentioned my dad with his poetry, I felt like there was a poetic side that I felt like connected with him. And he's been gone for 2 decades. And I think that was important to me. So I think combining that and then having this motivation to write about how the game could have this significance to our society beyond off the field, then there was, sort of a mission behind it as well to kind of, challenge that conversation. And so writing, over time, because I was doing a lot, did feel like the way I think in a way. It's funny, like a lot of my real close friends that read my book, they said, "Oh, it just sounded like you," because it's sort of how I talk and think. Like I just think in these like parentheticals and so and I love comparisons because I want to use comparisons to like bring people together around, this is like this, and you may come from this background. Look, I became very close to Jimmy Pearsall, and we could not have had opposite lives or experiences than 2 other people on the planet. But we just found common ground, and when you have those relationships, you could look to a larger society and say, what's not possible for us to figure out how to get along if these 2 guys can do it. So I think that's what I loved about it, and I think that there's an aspect of that does come naturally.
And that that is a great a compliment as a writer, because I've had people read the book and say, I felt like I was sitting having a beer and you were telling these stories. I mean, it just sounded like you, and that's that's what you want, that's what you hope anyway. Yeah.
I had an English teacher that used to say that also. That used to say, "Write the way you talk."
Mm-hmm.
Now, my name is James Joyce, and I never really accomplished that. But I was going to are you into poetry in your writings?
Yeah, I definitely, I don't necessarily like have books of poetry I read all the time in terms of, I don't have like necessarily favorite poets, but my dad left a ton of poetry. He published, self-published 2 books and just loved it. And I think that drove me in some ways to kind of look at the poetic side. I didn't write as much poetry younger. I'm more into essays. But then when I started really doing it more professionally, I started going back to some of the poems. And you'll see, like even at ESPN, I'll write kind of a poem and then speak it. And it's led to a lot of, essays. We had a, Emmy nomination a few years ago for it, just because I learned how to marry that with like the production side. So I found that not only is it the words on paper, but when you could bring it to life, video or audio or all these different things, there's a whole nother level that it can go. But I love it. And when I wrote my book, I wrote a poem in dedication to my dad who had passed. And, that was one of my first like public, like, here's a poem, see what you think. And it was called Lost and Found. And so that became, a real jump off point about once in a
Yeah,
while.
I think it's just sitting and listening to you talk about your dad is I can almost imagine you sitting at your writer's desk and your dad standing behind you. That's what you are portraying to me,
Yeah.
right? And it really kind of touches me. And we're baseball this and baseball that and baseball everything but that part of you, I get that feeling that baseball was just a vehicle. And this is really what you do well. You even do this better than you do baseball. That's the feeling I get.
Well, I'll tell you, my dad, set the tone in so many ways, and my mom, who is still with us at 87 years old as an educator, they were just a dynamic duo in many respects. Right? And when my dad got really sick, my mom combed the earth to just keep him around as long as possible. I mean, so I think I saw that. And I think the spirit of, baseball became, just like you said, almost like a conduit to all these things that I was celebrating in my life, and expressing it on the field became a different kind of joy. But so much of it was about connection with my family, my brother teaching me the game, really, my parents, where they came from. And you're on a stage. So in some respects, you're getting seen for how you're performing, but you're also realizing like, oh, wait a minute, after the game, you're talking to an audience, you're talking to more. And I started to see the stage differently than just like whether I went 2 for 4, but whether I actually had an impact, in the community and beyond. And so, yeah, I looked forward, once I was really, I went through the barbed wire of that decision to being like, my career's over. This is it. Like, it was almost like I'm on the other side now.
Yeah.
And it was, for me, it was quick. It was like I was Yankee spring training. I got released. My wife to be was down visiting, and I didn't want to go to AAA, so I became like big league or bust. And I was kind of a little surprised I got released, because I thought I had a shot. And then I was talking to my wife, and I was just like, it's kind of over. The phone rang a little bit, but it was about front office or AAA jobs, and then I was like, that's it. So I had to kind of come in, and then it like washed over me, like, wow, this has been a lifetime of like, I've been in a uniform way before I was a professional. So that was very hard at first, but I started getting excited though after that.
I get the both feelings because my last game was in Seattle and I didn't make the decision till the last out. And I had the plate that day.
Oh, wow.
And my wife and I had been talking about it, and baseball was giving me an opportunity. A couple of us, they'll remember we got kind of they threw a deal out there and said, you can do this. And all of a sudden, Axelrod was the pitcher and he struck the last batter out. And I kind of went, that might have been it right there. So I asked Axe for the baseball. And I gave him a different one. I said, here, lie about this one. And I want one though. And I know what you mean about that, because after the fact, actually it was my birthday.
Oh, wow.
And after the fact, Kay and I were driving back to Portland. I don't think we talked for the first hour of the drive. because we had talked maybe this was going to happen, and I was scared to say it, I
Yeah.
guess. And I know what you mean, where you're at that point, you're kind of looking around like, okay, what's the next sentence? I don't know. And I think we transpire into that, and it's people don't realize that, especially like Dale and I, our parents lived, as a matter of fact, Dale's mom is what, 90?
91, living with us here in Palm Springs, taking
Right.
care of her.
And
Yeah.
and his dad was in the 90s. Both my parents made it to the 80s, and the impact that they had on us was, immeasurable actually. And I remember when they retired, it was kind of like the same thing, and people don't realize that, especially us being in the sports world, in the professional baseball world, of how traumatic that really can be, and it depends on how you handle it, actually.
Well, my dad was a huge influence. In fact, it was a year ago yesterday he passed away. He was 93 and had a great run, but a little bit different than you. And I because of concussions, I got hit April 14th, and I didn't ever went back on the field. And I was going to go another 2 years was the plan anyway. Although I'll be honest, I was ready. I was ready because it's just a grind and a long 30.
See, Dale never learned to duck back there.
Well, I'm a duck that can't
He
duck,
is a duck.
which is
He
really,
is a duck,
yeah,
but he never learned to duck.
it's a bad situation there. But
Well,
but no,
Dale umpired without a mask, so that's part of the problem.
well,
too,
that's
so.
it. Beautiful face. But that no, you come to the realization you do this for so long. And of course, again, umpire careers are much longer than players, but you're in this for so long, and all of a sudden it's scary when you finally say, I'm going to retire. I mean, what do you do now? You're jumping off a cliff. You don't really know where it lands. And I had opportunity. What blew me away, or shouldn't have, I guess, but just from knowledge of umpires, and there's so many associations and amateur umpires and stuff that always want guidance and stuff. But I was had a lot of opportunities to speak at different umpire associations or invited to their clinics and stuff. I just didn't even think of that when I was leaving baseball. I thought, well, I guess I'm just going to go sit and do I don't know what, but I didn't realize there would be opportunities besides what happens on the diamond, and because that's just you're so ingrained in it. But the transition is. I do have a question though. Getting to your on ESPN and calling games behind the microphone, do you find it difficult to criticize other players if they make they miss a cutoff now, or they threw it to the wrong base or something, just something that happens in a game, and everybody does it. But the reason I ask, I know Jimmy was also, and I think you went for a screen test or something, but to be a rules analyst for Fox it's kind of like what they do with the NFL.
Yeah.
And I had a producer from Fox call me in 2018 or the end of 2017, whatever it was. But anyway, they said, would you be interested in doing this? And I said no. And there was other reasons, but one of the reasons was I just didn't know if I wanted to sit back there and, they're going to use us as a rules analyst when something's screwed up, probably, when something has gone sideways. And I just had no reason to. I did not want to sit up there behind a microphone and say, "Well, this guy who I've worked 250 games with in my career just screwed." I mean, you'd say it differently,
Yeah.
but just made a mistake. I didn't want. I think one of the guys that does a rules analyst really well in the NBA is what's his name from Philadelphia. Steve Javie. He can take a clip and say, well, yeah, it looks like maybe there was a foul here, but look at how the this and that, and look at the angle here, and he helps the viewer understand that. Oh, what's he looking at? That's ridiculous. It helps understand that look at the angle he has, or look at this player is right at the key time, kind of stepped in front of him, or whatever it is. He's not making excuses. He's just pointing out this is life on the court, and this is what happens. And I think you can do, and he does it, I think, really well. where he can point out a mistake being made, but also points out maybe some of the reasons why it happened, or this or that, instead of the just go to the bottom denominator. Oh, that's terrible. I don't know what he's looking at.
Yeah, I mean it's tough because it's like, sound bites, right? I mean it's just, you're looking for that first hit and then you go afterwards. And part of it, that was one of the first questions they asked me when I interviewed for ESPN. Are you going to be able to criticize former teammates or players? And the thing I kind of learned is that you don't really have to be criticized. You don't have to criticize in any negative way. You really don't. Like, you could just be constructive. You just be like, all right, I know he circled that ball and he really wanted to get his glove down here, but he didn't get far enough and it took him, it hit off his, you just can talk about it
Right.
without being like, what was he doing? Why is he going to third base right there? I mean, you could say like he, should have gone here, but here's why, without like trashing this guy completely. And, I think that's the line. And yeah, sometimes you don't know how that's going to play to your boss, let's say, or because they might be like, no, I want you to, I know for example, one discussion we had was, said, all right, when we were training about responding on, let's Sports Center or something, and they say, who's going to win the National League Central? They don't want you to go, well, this team, and they want you to say some like the Cardinals, the Cubs, and then give your back answer. And part of that was because when a lot of people are watching TV or listening on their phone while they're cooking, and then, and then they hear something like definitive and they're like, oh, let me tune in.
Right.
When they hear kind of background noise, it becomes background noise. And so I think the bigger challenge is the balance between delivering what is supposed to be what is content that people respond to, that may not be exactly how you want to present it, or it might be negative, and balancing that with like sticking to like the principles around like, hey, I know this is a hard game. That's why I'm here, right? I'm telling you, so I don't want to sit there and be like, how did he lose that ball in the sun? Well, I lost the ball in the sun before, and so, but it's doable. It's doable. And look, this is Alex Rodriguez said this to me. I know I'm like pulling a very random quote here, but a couple of years into my career at ESPN, he was still playing, and he came over to me and said, look, I appreciate and I played with him in 2003, he said, I appreciate what you do, because you can get famous doing what you do one of two ways. You could rip people or you could educate people.
Yeah.
So I think,
Exactly.
I think it's, I think that's pretty much right. And you can still
Dale
educate without being negative,
And Dale alluded to that when I was lucky enough to go down and actually do a screen test with Fox.
Yeah.
And on the same lines, they point blank asked me the same thing the way they asked you. Are you willing to criticize other umpires? And I said, I don't like the word criticize, because we get criticized enough.
Mhm.
You guys do that. I think it's more important to speak about what we were doing, analyzing the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I said, no, I'm not going to do that, it was pretty much not only my beautiful face, how I appeared over tape, which I was struck at, but they said no. So, but it all came down to whether or not I was going to blast, like Dale said, I was going to blast my, guys that I've worked with for 20 some years and such. And I think it's hard in baseball for umpires to do that. I don't know about like Dale says, Jaffe's very good at what he does. Football, I'm still out there on that one, because they have no problem blasting the guys they used to work with. And I think it's wrong. So, and like you said, if you can be constructive, that's the way it should be. As a matter of fact, that's the way we all should be.
Absolutely.
But see, the media, especially TV and sports TV, wants,
they want shock jock stuff. They want shock jock stuff. They want you to sit there and they want you to sit there and say, "Oh man, that Glanville, he dropped that fly ball. Why couldn't he catch it?
Right.
Why do you need to do that?" I don't understand that. But some of these guys, the shock jock announcers who scream and yell and criticize everybody, you've lost me right then and there. I can't put up with that.
Well, and a lot of times you don't even have all the information. Like,
right.
Even though you have the eyes for it, right? You might just need a little more context. I'll give you an example. Whit Merrifield was batting this year against Kopech Dodgers, and Whit had been really upset. You remember he got hit in the head, and he was like going off on young pitchers, and he was trying to change the policy. He was really upset and he was working on it. And Kopech pitched. He threw a pitch like kind of high in the zone, and I wasn't over his head, but it was up, and he was kind of staring, and they had and Kopech said something. Now I thought that he was upset at the pitch, but it turned out there was some exchange they had from the dugout, and so there was more to it. So and I know you don't want to. For me, I don't want to rely on people's like bad memories to be like, let me just rip Whit Merrifield for staring this guy down, and then later rely on the fact that people forgot 5 minutes later because something else happened, right? It's like your credibility is there. And I could go up to Whit Merrifield, and I did the next week and said, hey, just wanted to understand. He came on our podcast and we just talked it through. And then, I'll clarify if I have to. So I think it's this like, the hot takes, right, that are just sometimes just misinformed, but they're more interested in like how someone's going to react to that possibility of it being right, instead of like worrying about it being right and taking the extra steps. And then you could put it all together. So I found a balance, but I also know that, doing the job partly is going in the locker room the next day and talking to these players. And if they want to slam the door in your face, that's kind of a problem too for your access. So you gotta make sure that you say, you can say tough things, but you gotta be fair. You gotta be fair.
Let me ask you this, Doug. I played baseball 50 years ago in high school, and Jimmy and Dale, obviously umpires. The fundamentals in today's game are just atrocious. I mean, the Yankees can't manufacture a run to save their life. Does that, as a broadcaster watching these games and watching these bonehead errors that we learned as kids, that like PFP, running to first base, it's ingrained into you. Do you have to bite your tongue sometimes when you see that in a live game where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe they did that? Do you have to kind of like?
It's not bite my tongue. I just use it as an opportunity to reference it, and I try not to do the old, well, back when I was in my, we had, I just try to come up with, like, clearly Garrett Cole needed to cover first base, and that and I knew what happened. Like a play that a first baseman that's slow enough is going to run through the ball, and so he's like, so based on that calculation, it would have been an easy out, but the spin on that ball made him wait back, and that was where Cole lost, like he assumed. So it's like you could still teach and say that was a mistake, and a mistake he shouldn't have made. But it's like Garrett Cole's the worst pitcher on, this guy's a Cy Young Award winner, like he's the part of the reason they're there, right? But I think there's fundamentals, quote unquote, around, okay, base running, going first to third. Like here's an example. I learned how to slide like 15 different ways. Like I had to learn, because I was a base stealer and in the minors, and you had to check every box. It wasn't like, oh, you hit 350, go to the next level. Can you go first to third? Do you know how to read defenses? So I had to learn how to slide on my left side, on my right side, hook slide, back doors. I had to learn all these slides. And sometimes you see guys go in, which is very different because now the lane is open for you, head first, and all these things that they do differently. So yeah, time sometimes gives you that perspective, but I also recognize that there's a lot of things different about the game that they have to do that I didn't have to deal with, right? Whether pitch timers and all this other stuff. So I try to bring the good with the bad and the classic with the current, and find a way to like bring it into something uniform that really helps inform an audience.
There's always XYZ. There always is, no matter what. I mean, playing, umpiring, like you're saying, instead of jumping at somebody, that we incorporate that on the field, as a matter of fact, as umpires, because obviously it's a conflict. If a player's pissed off, you have to X, Y, and Z them. I mean, because it's either that, it's going to escalate, and you either put that fire out or you throw gas on that fire, one or the other. And it's the same thing as a player. And like you're talking about, different things happen in different plays. And like I've always said, you can't say anything or do anything until it happens. And I guess that's the best way, to explain it to people that I guess criticize all the time. And and I guess that's also the world we live in too right now. And it's, back in the day, Ernie Harwell and a lot of the old time, those guys never criticized. They just told you the story.
They had a
told you
unique
the
way
story.
of saying, it looks like umpire Dale Scott didn't see it the same way, or something.
Yes, Ernie
He didn't
Harwell.
say this guy is an idiot. He missed the tag. It's obvious. It's like, and you appreciate that. I mean, I remember I had a game. I won't go into all the details, but Joe Morgan. It was a Sunday night game, and when he was doing ESPN, and I missed a call at third. And they came back from a commercial, and he broke down like an umpire. I mean, I was amazed. He broke down why it was a shot down the line with runners running, so a runner running, stealing from second. So I've got that. I've got and I had to stay on the line longer than I normally would because it was a fair foul situation. So I had not a great angle on the play. And that's exactly what happened. And he he explained it perfectly. I thought this guy is, he should teach umpiring. Because you have other guys like Mark Harrelson and others that would just not would not be very nice to umpires, right? But it is. I do some rule analyst stuff with Brian Gorman and Ted Barrett with Apple TV Plus and MLB Network the past couple of years, and I've learned also that when they put you on because something's gone sideways, to massage that in such a way that you're not just blasting a guy, but you're also, like you said, educating. This is what happened. This maybe he could have gotten over here a little bit more, but look where the fielder, the pressure from the field, or whatever it is, and just explain it to which makes much more sense. You just said it with the covering first, Garrett Cole. You said, well, this had the spin on it and this and that. I mean, most people just say, why did he cover first? And there's a reason for it. It doesn't mean he still made a mistake. Yeah, but there's a reason for it. And at least it puts another thought into somebody's mind. And I think that's important to educate why things happen. And, that we're all just not idiots out there, just not knowing what we do or whatever.
Right. I mean, it's not binary. It's like this whole black and white. And like you said, the shock factor.
Yeah.
And you spend a lot of time like reacting to like, okay, something really dogmatic and definitive with like little information. And that's enough of a story. And I think it's coming back to stepping back a second, especially in a sport like you said in baseball, which is like there's a lot of second guessing in baseball. It's kind of the nature of the sport, right? It's like, oh, well, I should have done this. You should have taken that guy out and pinch hit. You can do that all day long, all day long. So at some point
they do it all day long.
Exactly.
Even in the off season.
Who were your family obviously was very, very important on nurturing you and becoming what you have become. But in the baseball world, who were your, I'm not going to say heroes because that's not the right word. Who were your teachers, your
mentors?
That's a great word. Did you have certain people that took a interest in you or you took an interest in them?
Oh, definitely. So many examples. I mentioned Jimmy Pearsall, who started off rocky, but we ended up like.
I have a story about Jimmy Pearsall.
Great friends. I think of Sandy Alomar Sr. I think of Tom Gamboa. Remember Tom? Attacked on the field.
I just saw Tom a couple months ago. Yeah,
Gamby, great dude. I mean, there's so many in baseball, but even coming up is like Sean Dunston and Mark Grace, guys, the veterans when I came up, because I was like the young guy on a very kind of old team in Chicago my first year. So there was a lot of guys to learn from. And I think that
because all those names that you're mentioning were all the good guys on the field.
Yeah.
Us.
Yeah. I mean, and Sean, I learned a lot from Sean because I remember when Joe West, he had like a good rapport with Joe. And at one point there was a pitch that he swung at and he was kind of mad at himself and he like dropped the bat. He kind of swung and then like threw it and Joe thought he was directing it towards him and I could hear him say, Joe, I wouldn't show you up like that.
Actually, I've seen that video.
So I remember like, oh yeah, I mean, so I learned a lot from so many players, so many coaches coming up along the way. And even like I was a Phillies fan growing up. So there was Mike Schmidt, Gary Maddox, Steve Carlton, those cats. And I remember playing for the Phillies, and then these guys became coaches and mentors.
Right.
Gary Maddox came to my wedding.
Oh, wow.
So became my off the field mentor with Gary Maddox talking, and Joe Morgan, by the way, was his mentor. So I love to pay it forward, pass it down about baseball, and it's just a great thing about the game.
How much did you learn from Gary Maddox in playing center field? Because the old adage was, the earth is covered by two-thirds water and the rest is covered by Gary Maddox. The
Oh, I
guy
love
could the guy could absolutely glide to the ball. Watching him as a kid, you're like, wow, he makes it look so easy. Did you
yeah.
learn a lot from him playing center?
Oh yeah, I talked to him a lot, and I appreciate, because it was something that I dealt with. If you're not running kind of like Willie Mays with like your clothes coming off and all that, they're like the perception that you're not running hard. So I saw Gary, I was like, yeah, you can be precise and still be running hard, but doesn't look it. So I think that was a thing that followed me a little bit, that turned into this positive, especially with Gary, picking my angles, and so he was great, and just anticipating where to be. One funny story is about generationally is Albert Almora Jr. When he was with the Cubs, I was announcing for NBC and Marquee, and we did a spring training segment where I would throw him balls and he'd run them down, and we were just talking about like angles and jumps and all this stuff. So one time I bring him back from the field on camera, and I say, let's talk about jumps right now. I learned under Jimmy Pearsall, and he would scream at us if we weren't in motion. If the ball was halfway to home from the pitcher, you had to be already leaning and anticipating where you're going. And so I got full speed starts, right center. I knew where the ball was going to be hit just on the batter and the angle. So I went into this whole thing about Jimmy Pearsall, and I concluded saying, so Albert, like, what do you do to get to the right spot? Like, what kind of jumps do you work on? What's your style? So I'm talking for 3 minutes, and then I go, okay, tell me. And he goes, well, why would I do all that stuff? Because with all the analytics today, I'm already at the spot. So I would just be running away from where the ball's hit. So I was like, oh, that just destroyed like 20 years of baseball.
Thank you. Back to you, Chris.
So that was just.
Well, I'm glad we cleared that up.
Jimmy Pearsall was here in Portland as a radio analyst for the Portland Beavers at one time, and I was in my last year at AAA. I'd actually been hired by the American League, but we were still working. We had to start in AAA. So I was working in Portland here. Jimmy Pearsall was the radio guy for the Beavers. So I went in, I just wanted to say hi to him and stuff. I had never met him before. And so I introduced myself and everything like that. And we had a pretty good talk and stuff. Well, so I go out and we work the game, and I get home that night, and my wife says to me, I was listening to the game, and who was that guy that was doing, oops, excuse me, sorry about that. Anyway, oh, sure.
We're a classy show here, Doug.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I didn't hear anything.
And that just disrupts your whole train of thought. So anyway, Jimmy, I said, his name is Jimmy Pearsall, and he's a very, very, very famous, baseball player. And I said, he's kind of a character. She goes, well, I guess he is. Nice. I said, what do you mean? She says, well, tonight, she says, when the ball was hit to the shortstop and the ball went through his legs, Jimmy Pearsall says, well, there's a ground ball to Joe Smith, and oh, what the happened to him? And I said, what? And she says, that's word for word what Jimmy Pearsall, what the man said, because she didn't know Jimmy Pearsall from a block punt. And I just laughed out loud, because that's Jimmy Pearsall. So
sounds like Harry Carey.
Yeah, pretty much. But I mean, Pearsall was a different cat.
Yeah, he was out there.
Yeah,
Hey, Doug, you were a base stealer.
Yeah.
And that art of base stealing kind of went away for quite a while. But now with the new rules, with the pitcher step off, disengage rule, and of course the the bigger bases, that it's a little bit closer to make that steal. And you saw steals go way up the last couple of years because of these rule changes. I would assume that you are in favor of that stuff. I mean, I think the stolen base, I know as an umpire, especially at second base, certain guys get on, you're just going, oh, here we go. Because he's going. You don't know, and Steele plays at second, frankly, just almost always seem like they're close. As an
Yeah,
umpire, it's just
absolutely.
the way it works. So I would assume that you like the new rule, or maybe all the rules, but that one for sure to stimulate stolen bases, which it has done.
Yeah, no, I like what the league has done to just get, with a timer and keep things moving at tempo, and just to bring back some of the athleticism around, like taking extra bases, going first to third, stealing bases, that excitement of like this could happen anytime kind of feeling. And also just watching all the different players that are running. You don't have to be a blazer. You go
Right.
back to like Keith Hernandez, or guys that are good base stealers, but they didn't necessarily have to be fast. Brings back that anticipation and studying the pitchers. And so I definitely like it. And now you see guys getting like running starts. They're picking up on tips. It's cool to see the studying that goes involved to find out what pitchers are doing, and then how they try to counter it is one of the great cat and mouse games that the game, I think is great that it's back and being able to have that again.
We,
So hopefully they keep running.
Yeah, well, that disengage rule with the pitcher, everyone was talking about the pitch clock when that came into effect. But I was saying, I think that was would be the biggest change, because first of all, you can't just step off because you're a little gassed because it's 100 degrees out into your pitch.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to go, and you only have so many disengagements. But just the fact that, a base stealer, or even a guy that, like you said, isn't a blazer, but can steal some bases. And now knowing that, he stepped off already, twice or once or whatever, I just thought that is going to change the game a lot, the way base runners and pitchers, and how that whole dynamic. I think it's proven. Certainly, like I said, with the statistics, because stolen bases went way up, attempts and stolen bases went way up once these new rules went into effect, because it was a dying thing before that. I mean, it just you just didn't have it very often, quite frankly. Analytically, I guess it's not, you're not supposed to do that. So, but it is, and Bob had alluded to it earlier. Some of the little things in baseball that have kind of, sacrificed hitting the other way, and stuff that maybe don't even show up in the box score. Now it seems like, I know it's not, but it seems like it's either home runs or strikeouts, and I think these new rules have helped to bring back a little bit of what the entire game is about, not just the specific mashers, and let's hit as far as we can.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I was talking to Nomar Garciaparra during the playoffs last year, or this past year, and we were just reminiscing about trying to take out the guy at second base,
Yeah.
and just how athletic these guys were, and they could jump over you. And I understand like why the rule became a thing, but you do miss that. Chico Lean, you remember him? And
Oh
Yeah.
God.
man, and I remember trying to take out Ozzie Smith in St. Louis, and it was like a dream. I was like, I mean, I was anticipating. I'm like, all right, if he hits a ground ball, if Grace was up, hits a ground ball to Gallego at second, Smith is going to be coming across the base, so I could destroy Ozzie Smith, and that would like immortalize me. That would, and all these people say they can't get him, whatever. So sure enough, ground ball to second, 4-6-3 time, and he's coming across second towards right field. I'm like, I'm going to be waiting for him right here. I'm going to pop up, flip him on his back. Got the wizard. I'm going to take his hat and put it on my mantle. And so I slid to the right side of second base. And I was practically in the outfield with my hand touching the base. He stepped on second and went back in towards the mound and threw for the double play. On the replay, I don't even think I was in the screen. Like I wasn't even like, it's like, that's why Ozzie Smith. And it's like, I loved it. I was like, that's Ozzie Smith right there. That's why you can't get this dude. And so, you just used to love that. And then he could anticipate, he'd throw inside, he'd flip it under, Dunston would throw that underarm. Okay, you better get down, So, some of those things you miss. And I know people get hurt and all that, but that athleticism, they've done a pretty good job of bringing some of that back in, to give people a chance to run and go first to third and just create some more excitement. That's not just the ball over the fence,
Right.
When they tweaked the rule after Hal McRae, I was all in favor of that. Like that, I was all in favor
was
because
crazy.
that was you talk about the destroyer. No doubt about that one. And I agree 100% with you. When they changed that rule at second base and at home plate, I don't want to. I'm the same way. I don't want to see anybody get hurt. That's
Yeah.
But you were taught a certain way to do it so you wouldn't get hurt, and I do miss that part of it, especially the home plate, the collision rule at home plate. There were so many ways to get around at home plate, and you know what? If it was blocked, you did something about it, but you didn't do it. You didn't do it intentionally to hurt somebody, and I think that's what we lost on that part of it. And that little rule enforcement after the fact was bad for baseball, in my humble opinion. And but they've kind of tweaked that to the point where we can live with it now, I guess.
We can't. We're running close to the end of this, but
Yeah.
we can't let you go. We got two umpires here. And what do you think about umpires? I mean, now we had talked earlier that you didn't.
Okay,
Doug,
who was your favorite umpire?
Yeah.
Well, it's who was my favorite? Well, I can think of guys that I knew from the beginning. I came up with Bruce Dreckman, Miners, and Andy Fletcher.
Yeah.
So I remember, and CB Buckner. Those were the guys that were in like A ball with me. So I kind of think of it that way. And as you know, Dale, like I've written a lot about umpires, and my favorite piece, if I haven't sent it to you, I'll send it to you, is I was just, I don't know, it was an outrage I felt as a player, as unfair the criticism on umpires, right? So, and when I started, so it was at ESPN when the instant replay rule started coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And I started, we got all the data, and I was like, okay, these guys are right like 99% of the time, first of all. Yeah. So I was just, so I just looked at the data, like you could say whatever you want, but here's the numbers. Here are the numbers. And so when I started reading that, I ended up writing these pieces, and just to tell you how moved Joe West was, Joe and I were cool. Joe calls, this is before a game, Joe West calls me in to the umpire room and says, man, I read your article. I want you to meet Waylon Jennings. And I'd never had that kind of conversation with Joe before. He was just opening up his friends, and we were talking, and he said how much he appreciated. But the theme of it was this. As like all these people talking all this trash about umpires without, first of all, looking at the data and how good they are. They are the best in the world, number one.
Absolutely.
Number two, you're talking about they're being biased, yet the most biased people are you. Like you're a fan of the team, so don't tell me you're completely biased. You're a player on the team, so you're completely biased. All the people that are making all the noise are completely biased. They're the least biased people in the equation are the umpires, actually. So I just threw it out there like that. Like, have you ever seen a player dive for a ball in the outfield, trap it, and then run in and say, I didn't catch it. I didn't catch it. Like, come on, it doesn't happen. So I'm just, so I just wanted to make that like real clear. Like, these, the umpires do a great job. And by the way, like as an analyst now traveling, I was on a couple of flights with umpires on it. They're wiped out like we are. They're missing their family. Guys are, right, connecting, sleeping on the plane. It's like, look, let's get perspective here. So I've written a lot. One was called Black and Blue. I've written a few things about it, and I think it's just on reflection. And I think it's part of the reason when I played, I didn't get ejected, because it's like, it's hard. It's hard. And I also know, like, am I gonna, like, if I think of the times I might have even thought about getting ejected, it's like 2 times out of like thousands of games and innings, and I can't even think of it. Like one time I stole second. It was like a weird mid-afternoon game on Saturday at Veterans Stadium. I stole second. I had a little streak going too. I popped up, guy catches it with his foot on the base, and I come in, and then he tags me. And I'm like, okay, I stole that by like a mile. So I'm just getting ready, and called me out. And Terry Francona walks out onto the field, and he says, "Hey, I can't remember who it is. I have to look it up. Hey, man, like I know you realize you missed the call, so you can change it." He's like, I can't. I know I'm totally wrong, but I fell asleep and I just completely forgot. I thought it was a force play, and I just like, that's my bad, but I can't change it." And that was it. And I just said, okay, I just walked off the field. Like, it's like, what are you going to do? He's like, I messed up. I just, cause I'm sure I did it. I forgot how many outs there were at a game in Arizona. Like, happens. So I just moved on, and that's it. So I just can't think of a reason to totally blast anybody, no matter how emotional it is. Like, I don't know. That's just where I was coming from. And I remember coming up, I used to call the umpires Blue.
Yeah.
Hey, Blue. And finally, it might have been Andy Fletcher saying, "We have a name, dude." Like, he's like, "I'm sorry. That was a word of respect growing up. I called everybody Blue, just like I called everybody Coach. But I'm glad you're giving me the right to call you Andy."
Right.
So now we're cool. Thank you for that.
It's funny. That's one of the first lessons in the minor leagues that you teach with guys. Hey, Blue, can you take it? My name's Dale.
Yeah.
And I'm sure before the season's over, you'll call me something worse, but my name's
Well, now you see why I did this did this podcast, Doug. I mean, I wanted the umpire's view on stuff like all the stuff we're talking about, because people don't know this. They think these umpires are robots and you can scream and yell at them, and I was as guilty as everybody else. And then you get to know them, and they're like they're human beings, and you know what? They're right, like you said, Doug, 99% of the time. And you show me a business where somebody's right 99% of the time. It doesn't happen. I mean, and it's proven. What's the stat, Dale, that you told me about balls and strikes one time? What was
Well,
that?
uh, the last year the entire year, the umpire staff was their ball strike percentage. They were correct. It was like 98.2% or just right in that area. Now that's tens of thousands of pitches. I don't know how many pitches. The problem is if you have a miss in a critical time, and Jimmy can talk about that. But I mean, if you
Oh, gee.
if you have total different, but seriously, that's what spurs. You could be. If I have a miss in the bottom of the second with nobody on a game in April in Cleveland, it may not even be registered, but that same miss with the scoring run in October or September or something, suddenly I'm the worst umpire that walked the earth. And so as an umpire, you're going to make mistakes. You just are really hoping it's not a situational time and a key time that it happens. But I remember you writing. It was probably 10 years ago, I would think, because that's when replay was starting or whatever. But I remember reading it and thinking, man, this is well thought out. This is obviously as an umpire, and I agreed with you immensely about everything you said. But so I understand why Joe was real happy to
Yeah.
bring you in.
It was like an icebreaker for Joe. But
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know. It's when you have like all these cameras, right? And the thing you realize is like, I remember George Will said this. It's like when you try to make something perfect, you make it worse.
Yeah.
And it's like measuring up to perfection is part of the problem. It's part of the problem. It's part of where you lose your humanity, right? You lose.
Yep.
And I think it's like we can take all these experiences, mistakes, our worst moments, and find something to really learn from and like show grace. And I think that to me is one of the great parts of baseball that still has an opportunity to continue to be a centerpiece of it. That it's not perfect. We're not perfect. We every day, like greatest players of the game are just missing cutoff men, and like that's the granular nature of baseball, right? You're every single day, you could reduce the greatest players to like the worst players in a moment, and that's like life, So I love that. I wish we would lean in more of that and not really get too far down the rabbit hole of like blasting people for mistakes and all this other stuff. When it's like try to do anything every day at that level, anything.
Well,
it's
that
hard.
was one of the things that I enjoyed about when I first started umpiring and officiating football and basketball stuff is that you go out there every day, trying to be perfect, knowing good.
Hey, we don't use that word on this podcast.
Yeah, perfect. Trying to be, get everything right.
There you go.
and but the challenge was this is the same game that it was yesterday, same rules and everything, but you never know what's going to happen, and you can be as prepared as you can as an umpire, but then S hits the fan, man, and you have this, you have that. I had that playoff game when he throws the ball, hits the hitter that's just standing there, and the run scores. It's like, what the hell? I mean, there's only and so the challenge that I enjoyed was, how do you, when the S hits the fan, how do you keep your cool and just step by step get through this mess and get going? And I've told umpires and people before, I've walked off, and Jimmy can relate to this. I mean, I've walked off the field after a game where somebody's, hey, good job, Dale, hell of a game. And in my mind, I'm going, no, it really wasn't. I should have done this here, and I missed this here, or whatever. I've also walked off the field when both dugouts were on fire, and it was it was a S show, and everybody thinks that just this, and I can look in the mirror and say, you know what, Dale, you handled that really
Right.
well. That was a mess, and you did exactly what you needed to do, even though no one's going to believe you. So, I mean, Jimmy, you could relate to that. It's just you have to be honest with yourself, though, and that's very important.
And I think players dealt with the same thing. If the player could go into the locker room and look in the mirror and say, you know what, I gave it everything I had out there, and I left it out there. You know what, I'm good with that. But that guy from the media comes in and says, well, did you really give your best effort today? Or, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but I think the media is tough to deal with in that regard. And the media is not looking for the feel good story to a certain degree. And you're exactly right. And I'm sure that I know you dealt with the media more than we did, because the media is afraid to come and talk to the umpires in the first place. So.
Well, I think we got to. I know. Doug has other commitments to do, and I don't want to hold him up too much longer. But Doug, it's been a pleasure having you. You've educated us, and you've uplifted the show to almost Ivy League. Well, I won't even go that far. We're talking. You've uplifted us at AA level now, so we appreciate that.
There is no doubt that we're much classier today after this hour than we were. There's no doubt.
I'll tell you right now, that bar has been set pretty high.
I know.
To be very honest with you, it's gonna take a lot to get over that bar.
Well, we can bring Bach and Bob back on. He could probably get us over the bar.
I said over the bar.
Yeah.
Hey, Doug, thank you very much for coming on with us. We want to have you on again next year sometime. We'll talk baseball, whatever we want, whatever you'd like to talk about. We'd love to have you on again.
All right. Well, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Doug, thanks a lot. Thank you.
All right, guys. All right.
Okay, thank you. He is Doug Glanville. He is Dale Scott. He's Jimmy Joyce, for all you fans out there. I just have a moment to thank everybody so far. We've been doing this 6 months. It's going really well. I can't ask for two better partners in Dale and Jimmy. We have a blast, and we have great guests like Doug. Thank you. You guys have a happy holidays, and we'll see you again next year. And always remember, take the road to the left. Don't be a sheep. Don't be a follower. You never know what you'll find. Thanks,
Merry
everybody.
Christmas, everybody.
Happy
Merry
holidays.
Happy holidays, guys.
We'll see you guys in 2025. Bye-bye.